understanding in the world. There are still many gaps, and today modern believers tend to fill those as yet open gaps with their particular God. In Canada and in the United States, it happens to be primarily the God of the Bible, the God Elohim, the war God of the Old Testament, who had a son, by the way. He got a woman pregnant somehow, who was a virgin, and he had a son named Jesus. And Jesus was supposedly the anointed Christ one, so most of the followers of this war God of the Bible call themselves Christians. The burden of proof in any debate is on the shoulders of the person who makes the assertion. The theist says there is a God, or I believe in a God. The atheist simply says, I don't have a belief in a God. I don't have that belief. If Peter was believing in leprechauns, he's free to do so. It would not be incumbent on me to disprove his belief in leprechauns. There is evidence for leprechauns, by the way. There are people who believe in the existence of leprechauns. There are stories about leprechauns. There's pictures about leprechauns. There's a history. There's a legend. There's mythology. There's a big lore of leprechauns. How many in this room believe in leprechauns? Any Irish here? No? I've met some people who believe in leprechauns. But it would not be incumbent on me to disprove your belief in leprechauns. You're the one with the belief that's extra from what we both share. It is your responsibility to prove to me that in fact what you are claiming is true. Now, if there's one thing that is obvious about the existence of God, is that the existence of God is not obvious. If it were, would we be having a debate like this? If the existence of God were something we would all know, there would be no atheists. We would all say, oh, of course, there is a God. There are 6 reasons that I'm going to give tonight, briefly, why I don't believe in a God, and I don't think you should either. First is there's no evidence. There's no evidence at all. I used to preach that there were all these miracles and prophecies and answers to prayer and the Bible and the resurrection of Jesus and so on. But as you scratch beneath the surface, the evidence disappeared. It's the same evidence for Santa Claus or for leprechauns. It's there, but when you scratch beneath the surface, you realize it is a product of human creativity and myth-making. If there were evidence for a God, think about this. If there really were, right? If there were some kind of evidence that came close to proof, by now someone should have won the Nobel Prize for it, right? Every scientist in the world would jump at a chance to demonstrate the existence of a hitherto unknown force in the cosmos, wouldn't they? Anybody would love to do that. Why haven't they done that? Why has that not been done yet? Why are we still having debates? Does God exist? It's obvious that there is no evidence for a God. Faith is not evidence. Faith, in fact, is a surrender. If you have to have faith to believe that God exists, then you are surrendering. What if scientists were to get together every weekend, hold hands in a circle, and start singing and praying, yes, gravity is real. I know gravity is real. I believe in my heart that what goes up, up, up must come down, down, down. Amen. What if they did that? Every week they got together and they reinforced each other. And they said, yes, have faith. Be strong. Don't yield to temptation. Just keep believing in gravity. You would think they were pretty insecure on the concept, wouldn't you? If that's what we see believers doing. They get together. Be strong. Have faith. Don't yield. If it were a fact, we wouldn't need faith. Faith is a surrender of fact. Second, there is no coherent definition of a God. Every theology defines it in a different way. And very few theists actually make their statement that God exists falsifiable. If you're going to claim that there is a God, then there must be statements which can be made which, if true, would prove that there's not a God. And the failure to provide or substantiate those falsifiable statements actually strengthens your claim that there is a God. If we found one black polar bear, if we did, that would falsify the statement that all polar bears are white. So I'm going to ask Peter tonight to give me an example of a statement which would, if true, falsify theism. Not that it is true, but if true, that it would make your hypothesis false. And if you want to ask me what would cause me to change my mind, you're welcome to do so. And some of the definitions of God are contradictory. It'd be like arguing, does a married bachelor exist? Well, we can argue and argue, but by definition, such a thing cannot exist. And there are definitions of God, for example, of God as being with free will who knows the future. If you know the future, then you don't have free will. You can't have both. If God has free will and God knows the future, then he knows his own future actions. Therefore, he does not have the power to change his own future actions before he gets there. Therefore, he has no free will. One of those has to go. If God is defined as a free will being who can make decisions and who knows the future, that God is a married bachelor. That God, by definition, cannot exist. Number 3, there are no good arguments for the existence of a God. Theists over the centuries have tried to present arguments from design, from cosmology, from first cause, the teleological design arguments. There's the ontological group of arguments that Bertrand Russell was momentarily convinced when he was a teenager that there was a God by the ontological argument, but he thought a little bit deeper and he said, all these arguments just boil down to bad grammar. And he jettisoned any idea. These arguments might look good to a believer, but when you scratch beneath the surface, these arguments are really bad arguments. The argument for morality, for example. Number 4, there is no agreement among God believers as to the nature or the moral principles of this God that they think exists. You name it. Pick any moral, social issue that we're struggling with right now. What are some of them? Abortion rights, gay marriage, stem cell research, the war, death penalty, doctor-assisted suicide. You can name a bunch more. Society's struggling with these issues, right? You can't name a single issue on which devout, Bible-believing, praying Christians don't fall on both sides of those issues. Look at the marches. Christians are on both sides. They have the same book. Paul wrote in the Bible, God is not the author of confusion. But can you think of a single book that has caused more confusion than the Bible? Think about it. All these sects and denominations and groups, they all can prove to you that their little version of theology is the correct one. And they can open the Bible and show, we have the right one. The others are all wrong in some way, either radically or even they're even going to hell because of it. So I think there's pretty good evidence right there that Christians don't agree on the definition of a God or on the moral principles of this God. And Paul said, if the trumpet gave an uncertain sound, who's going to march to battle? The Bible gives a very muddy, immoral, amoral, uncertain guidance about how we should live our lives. It is irrelevant to today. God believes it's irrelevant to how we solve modern problems. Number 5, there are no answers to the positive arguments for the non-existence of a God. For example, the problem of evil. You probably saw Bart Ehrman's new book, God's Problem, which shows that even the Bible itself is contradictory. The Bible gives different answers as to why there is evil in the world. All you have to do is walk into any children's hospital, and you know there is no God. These parents who desperately love their kids, who are praying desperately for these children to be healed or saved or whatever, these kids die, sometimes horrible deaths. If there were a loving God, there would have been no Holocaust over his chosen people that he promised to protect. If there were a loving God, we wouldn't have all these tragedies. And that a God who really cares and loves, the problem of evil is insoluble. Theologians admit. It's easy to come up with a pat answer to, oh, well, we have evil because of this or that. And there's 5 or 6 different theodicies, but none of them are satisfactory answers. If you had known what the terrorists were going to do on 9/11, and you had the power to stop them with no risk to yourself, would you have stopped it? Would you? Sure. I sure would have. If I could have stopped, I could have given them a heart attack or made a flat tire in the plane or something. If I could have done that, I would have done that, right? And how many of you would have stopped the evil from happening, right? Well, then you're nicer than God. Because God knew about it. God could have stopped it. God promised to answer prayers. God listened to the prayers of those believers who were in that building that day, who were trusting that God bless America, and yet he let them. If he exists, he's an accomplice to the crime because he could have stopped it and did not. Number 6. How are we doing tonight? Okay. Number 6. There's no need for a belief in God. Why bother with the belief? Why torture ourselves with this unprovable, incoherent, contradictory idea that no one can agree on, no one can prove, when millions